Right, I think that's long enough. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, where we've got, I hope, a really lively discussion on MSP trends to watch in the second half of the year and beyond. I'm really pleased to have sort of two great panelists on board today, which is Antoine Jabara and Mike De Palma, who are both great friends of mine. I've worked for both for a long time, so I'm really interested in hearing what they've got to say. I've got a bunch of questions that I'm going to be putting to them, but please, if you have any questions yourself, please drop them into the chat and we'll ask them at the end to try and keep things lively. But I guess to start things off, Mike, maybe if you can do us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mike De Palma, I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Datto, now Kaseya company. I've been with Datto about 8 years, traveling the world. Obviously, as Chris mentioned, we worked together for several years as well. In my role, it's not necessarily sales, it's not necessarily marketing. A lot of it is this kind of, being an evangelist out in the channel, trying to talk to partners about the trends that you're seeing, so that when we have a webinar like this, we can communicate what's been working, what communication skills have been working for the channel out there. So, real excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
No, you're always more than welcome, Mike. And Antoine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Happy to be here. I'm one of the co-founders of JumpCloud. I'm also the GM of our MSP business. Before that, I was the CEO of a company called MyKey that offered password management for MSPs. Chris and I have been working for years together. And so I spend a lot of my time working with our MSPs, growing with our MSPs, and hopefully I'll get to share some of the interesting things that I've been seeing.
Cool. Well, that's set the scene, and these are some of the topics we're going to cover today. I'll run through them in turn as we go along, but just hearing some background noise there from somewhere. Okay, well, I'll press on with question one. So part of this is done some research that Mike shared with us from Kaseya and Datto, which is sort of through surveying their partners, which was really useful. So the first question would be, from that research, we've seen that 76% of MSPs have now moved more than half of their workloads to the cloud, and that's a number that continually increase. But again, in that same survey, 99% of MSPs predict that that's going to be sort of almost 100% of their workload within 3 years. So with that in mind, what are the security implications that MSPs should be considering as this sort of relentless move to the cloud continues? We'll start with Mike.
Yeah, I think we in the IT space have known that this was coming for a while. I think the pandemic kind of accelerated this shift to the cloud and got us to where we are now faster than I think a lot of people thought. But we've all been preparing for this, right? And what I find interesting about the cloud and the adoption rate of it, and also the security side of it, is, if you remember, 5-10 years ago, there was this big fear in the business community of the cloud. The cloud was a scary place and it wasn't secure. Now that everybody's moving to it, it's almost the exact opposite. People think they don't have to put as many security measures in place because, hey, it's the cloud, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, they're safe and things like that. So as the MSP space has been adopting it, and I think a lot of the businesses that are working with an MSP, those are the ones that are going to trend towards moving to the cloud sooner, because obviously the managed service provider is guiding them there. The key component here within the channel is to make sure that you are educating those small businesses about all the ways that you're more productive as a business that has moved to the cloud, but also all of the things you have to do on that security side. Treating that data the same as whether it's living on an on-premise Windows-based server like back in the day, or whether it's living up in the cloud through SaaS applications or anything like that. So, it's been an exciting time, and it's been something we've been talking about, especially Datto, who is based on an on-premise, backup solution. We've known that this shift was coming. We made some plans with different acquisitions and product launches, knowing that we're getting here. And now that we're in the thick of things, I think that 99% number is spot on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Antoine, your thoughts on that? Obviously, Mike, you was a sort of a cloud company born kind of in the cloud era, and you've obviously seen very security focused at the time and seen sort of more and more things in the cloud. So any particular security concerns you think MSPs need to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud offered an amazing opportunity for all sorts of companies, and it continues to do so. It's now clear that moving to the cloud is the right move for most companies out there. And I mean, we saw this at MyKey, but at JumpCloud as well. I mean, we're a company that has the keyword cloud in its name. We're a cloud native company that was created to help a lot of companies move to the cloud over 10 years ago. So we're very familiar with the space. It's our bread and butter space. So the space has opened a lot of new possibilities for companies. Now people can work from anywhere on any device and can use any type of third-party solutions that have now become extremely accessible. Right? In this new cloud-based setup, digital identities become the foundation of your stack. Right? It's not the device anymore that needs to be protected within the perimeter. It's actually the identity of the user through which you're giving them access to different types of content, revoking their access, setting conditional access policies, and all of that. So it's very important to ensure that you have a single source of truth for identities and that your identity and access management architecture makes sense for the type of work and growth that the companies that you're working with are planning. That not only serves them from a productivity perspective, but it also enables companies to be easily cyber compliant, get cyber insured, adopt a zero trust approach. It will reduce their reliance on end users to keep companies' assets secure. So it will reduce it, but not completely take it away. One of the downsides of the move to the cloud is the fact that the attack surface is now much bigger and that users keep being the weak link in your architecture. So it's very important to continue to train users and invest more and more in doing that, because regardless of the setup that you end up with, even if the foundations are extremely solid, that you're able to scale them really well, your users can still be a concern, and that's something that should not be overlooked. I know that a lot of you already view this as a very important thing, but that's not gonna go away anytime soon because of software improvements from different vendors. You're gonna still need to go after this like target and maintain a strong security culture within the organizations that you're working with. So there's tons of opportunities, tons of benefits from a security perspective, but you need to be set up correctly and you need to be in the right mindset to enable your customers to seamlessly move and grow in the cloud.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I think Mike mentioned a point there, which is spot on, is that the move to the cloud was already happening, but then the sort of pandemic came along, which accelerated that. But then I guess the kind of move to kind of working from home and bring your own device and all this kind, your own Wi-Fi network, that's kind of what's sort of expanded the sort of security vector as well. So it's been great, but I think that the pandemic's probably made it slightly more difficult as well for MSPs to secure.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen how amazing MSPs were during the pandemic at helping their customers move to the cloud literally overnight sometimes, and how our partners in general and MSPs in the market have been able to just adapt to this. Now, a lot of the times you've had to create a patchwork of solutions in the very short term to just set yourself up to enable your customers to remain productive during this difficult phase that we went through a couple of years ago. And if you haven't done so already, now's the perfect time to kind of rethink about this, not just from a security perspective, but also from an operational perspective, and to set your MSP up for success. Like you can easily find areas of inefficiencies, and these inefficiencies have grown a lot in the past couple of years. So getting them back down will make your business more profitable for sure, and will improve your security posture. So it's hard to prioritize this sometimes when a lot of the time you're just dealing with fires, but taking a step back sometimes and setting a medium to long-term roadmap to get to the setup that you want to be in, ideally, it's very important.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'd have seen this a lot, Mike, in terms of, MSPs have probably been banging the drum about moving to cloud and about remote working and security before the pandemic, and there was very little interest from these small to medium business owners. And then the minute everyone had to work from home, the sort of phones were ringing off the hook because all of a sudden they needed it doing sort of there and then.
Yeah, it happens with just about everything, right? The channel is always ahead of the small business community. And I think you're spot on. We all knew that this was I can remember a presentation from DattoCon 2017, where the conversation was about looking at the individual as opposed to the endpoint and having a home office in the box, so that it doesn't really matter where that employee is physically sitting. They're going to have access to all the tools that they need, and they could operate as whether they're in an office or a cubicle or in their kitchen on their kitchen table. But to the earlier point, I think folks that weren't working with a managed service provider and they just decided, okay, we're going to just get a device in somebody's hand and send them out on their way. That was just low-hanging fruit for these criminals, because they look at the networks they were working on. Think about protocols that weren't being followed. We saw a lot of wire fraud, right? Of people saying, wire this money out. There's nobody to just look over the cubicle and ask. And just by human nature, your sense of security just drops when you're at your house as opposed to an office. And so it was really a strong time for the MSP community to shine here. And if you look at the attacks and you look at the folks that were working with an MSP and the ones that weren't, those folks that weren't and trying to handle it all on their own, those are the ones that the criminals were going after. And they didn't even really have to change much. It was still phishing emails. It was still very basic attacks that they were doing, and they just had a higher success rate. And so that's why we're seeing so much momentum in the channel. And that's why security continues to be every single industry event. You guys both know this. It's all security focused, and I get it. But it's really the channel's job to be able to give these folks the cliff notes, the simple version of what is really happening out there. Here's the simple ways that you could just start through people, processes, before you even talk about technology. And then that's the way that, you know, the business community as a whole can start to, you know, win some of these battles against the criminals.
That's so true, by the way. Like our MSPs have been growing so much lately. Like when you look at the complexity that IT in general now has built in, and how security is evolving so quickly every day. If you're a small or medium-sized business somewhere doing your own thing, like it's just like no one would expect you to be able to anymore keep up with these trends and just keep yourself and your business protected from the different threats and while remaining productive. Right? This is why like the channel is growing so quickly, and that's not going to stop, right? Like I think that's going to go even faster now with all of the new types of threats that are showing up and the investments that are continuing to ramp up.
Yeah, and I was recording a podcast only the other week and talking about the fact that when the move to the cloud first happened, I think MSPs saw it as a threat, thinking that a lot of this stuff is going to be dealt with by SMEs independently and directly because it's simpler. But it's proven to be completely the opposite to that, and it's become that MSPs are kind of more important than ever before now.
Yeah, and we're now on this path where this is now established, and it's going to continue getting more harder and harder for an individual business to keep up. So like if you project us to the future, like 5 years from now, it's now safe to assume that there's going to be more MSPs that are thriving than there are even today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking of MSPs, let's move on to the next question, because I know that it's kind of related, and it's a very common question around MSPs, is we continue to see that MSPs around the world have got huge hiring challenges. I guess that's because there's more competition with working from home, working from anywhere, and there's the demand. MSPs are getting busier and busier. To get the correct skilled staff in place is more difficult. So, I mean, how can MSPs sort of try and address that skill shortage?
Well, I'll start, and I think there's two ways, and I'll put the positive spin on it, right? We think about, this comes up in our studies when I go out and do just surveys before a peer group or anything like that. It always comes up, one of the top concerns for the channel is hiring, right? But flip it on its head. Think about how hard it is for us, as you were mentioning earlier, to keep up to date with all the different trends and all the different threats. Put yourself in the business owner's shoes, a small business owner. If we're having a tough time as vendors, as MSPs, finding qualified IT talent, think of how difficult it is for that small business to try to hire an in-house person. Think about the turnover there, because the employees in that instance have a lot of the leverage. So I take this as a real big opportunity as an MSP to go out there and say, hey, I know it's difficult to hire IT talent. That's why you should outsource it to me. I know MSPs that go on job boards and will find open IT positions and call up and say, have you ever thought about outsourcing it? Because it's probably a more efficient way to do that. So the opportunity is really big there. Now, in terms of how we combat that, I think a lot of that comes down to efficiency and really understanding your workforce. How are we going to make sure that we're utilizing the talents of all the people properly so that we can make sure that when we're creating a role, it's fitting the need, but it's also going to give that employee the value that they feel like they need, so that we don't lose them and we don't have retention issues. So there's a positive spin on that, because if we're seeing that, the small business community is seeing it at a much greater scale, And if we're having a tough time keeping up with all the threats and all the different new products that are out there, think about the one person IT person for a company. How are they ever going to keep up with that? So there's a lot of, you could take that and look at it as a lot of opportunity for us as well.
100%, and the setup of your stack is going to be a big factor in helping you scale, right? When you think about your stack as tools that you need to do your business, if you can get your people to be 2-3 times more efficient in things that are high volume but low impact, then you can find efficiencies that are going to allow you to do way more with the people that you already have. They're going to feel more fulfilled, and then as Michael mentioned, whenever you want to grow the team after that, you know exactly who you want to hire, what their mandate's going to look like, and you're going to get the most value out of them. And the way you can do this is by adopting a unified approach to your stack, by consolidating different capabilities together with fewer vendors that don't lock you into their ecosystem. I think both our companies are a good example of doing that, because you're able to do a lot with very little clicks, because that's what it ends up being a lot of the time. Also, adopting point solutions or vendors that lock you into their ecosystem is a big problem, because managing vendor relationships, managing a cloud of point solutions scalably and growing the cloud and growing it is one of the biggest challenges that we have today. This touches on the finances of your business, the productivity of your team members, the satisfaction and fulfillment of your team, the hiring complexity of the people that you need to get in your ranks. It's just a super hard problem. Also, like ensuring that your team is properly trained, this is something that cannot be said enough. You know, like training is sometimes viewed as an upfront cost when you hire someone, the ramp period. But what training usually is a continuous effort, right? Where you need to make sure that they're using all of the different capabilities to their maximum potential, where they know the limitations of the different tools in order to keep them in knowledge bases the minimum amount of time possible. That will yield results, a lot of good results, obviously, in the long term. And I've seen MSPs that do this, and partners in general that do this very successfully, be very successful as a whole. And the last point that I would touch on is, and that's kind of a luxury that some of you will have and others might not have, but can position themselves in a way where they could have it, is picking the right customers. You already have a client base today, but you're growing your business over time. And the type of customer that you decide to partner with is very important, and is going to have an effect on how many people you need to be efficient over the long term. So when you look at companies, if you find companies that we call them, they meet the Crunchbase profile, they're essentially small companies that are cloud native, that have the potential to grow very quickly over time. These are the companies that will tend to match the growth mindset that you're putting yourself in, and will grow very quickly with you over time, because they already recognize the value that you're bringing. You don't have to fight over basic things that need to be there, and they'll tend to grow in terms of user base over time, which will grow their contribution to your revenue over time as well.
I think that's such a good point. Our team, we run our marketing development fund program, so we do a lot of lunch and learns with our partners. And the initial conversation is, well, tell me about the event. What do you plan to do? I want to get 100 people there. And that sounds great, but if they're not 100 people that are actually the companies you want to work with, you're just filling a room with people for the sake of doing it. And I know it's easy for me to say, I don't run an MSP, I've never owned an MSP, and it's hard for me to tell people, hey, sometimes you got to say no to some businesses because they're not a good fit. But I can tell you that's what the successful MSPs do. I know it's hard to say. Somebody might call you up and say, hey, I want to sign this contract, but understanding who that sweet spot client is going to be the key component to your growth, because you could say, okay, I'm going to make this money, but they're going to erode all my margin because it's not the type of business I want to work with. That's going to prevent your growth. It's going to prevent you from hiring the right people too, because now you don't have that revenue coming in to hire the right people. And to your point earlier about training, I think that's such a key component to it, making the investment in your employees to keep retention. If you look at study, and this is beyond the IT space, but just in employment in general, the reason why a lot of people leave their jobs is because they don't feel like their employer is making an investment in them. And I hear the flip side from partners that say, well, I don't want to pay for all these certifications so that now they could update their resume and somebody will come and scoop them up. I get that. That's a concern. But the trends really don't show that that's the case. If you make those investments and you put the training in and you let these people know that they have a career path within your company, the retention rate will increase for your business. So I think the training piece is a huge part of how we combat this, this gap in talent we might have.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting point that you made right at the beginning there, Mike, is that it's not only MSPs that have got this hiring problem and vendors that have got the hiring problem, it's the SMEs themselves. And that does creates a huge opportunity for SMEs to kind of step in there and say, well, you don't need to hire people to do this. We can help you out with your IT and security requirements. So, okay, well, moving along, Antoine mentioned it in the previous answer, so I'm really excited about this one because it's probably one of the questions I see asked most on Reddit and Google, or when I go to an event, people kind of walk around, shake someone's hand and say, what's in your stack? It's kind of, everyone's kind of keen to know what everyone else is doing. So, you know, MSPs, 97% of the people surveyed identified as an MSP in the Datto and Kaseya survey. But the stacks vary massively. I guess some MSPs probably do a lot more security than others. But what would you say are the kind of core items that should be sat within an MSP's tool stack? And we'll start with Mike on this one.
Yeah, I think it actually leads in from the last answer that we were given about your sweet spot client. So figure out what your client base looks like. It could be vertical specific, it could be size, it could be regional, whatever that is, and making sure you're checking off all the boxes there. But I think at the bare minimum, I mean, things like obviously MFA and stuff like that are critical. But I would look at go take a look at like cyber insurance policy and say, what are the requirements there? Because at a minimum, if a business wants to outsource their IT and their security to you, you should be able to provide enough services to get them an insurance policy. So you could start there. I mean, there's a million, you go to any of these events, there's hundreds of vendors there with all really cool products that's kind of what makes the channel cool, because everybody can customize their own stack, but you need to have that baseline security piece in there. That's where I would start. Obviously, MFA, you can't get an insurance policy anywhere in the world without multi-factor authentication. So that goes without saying, but take a look at what's in there. And can I fill out this application with my client and make sure that we're addressing all of the things, or at least put them on a path towards addressing all those things? That's where I would start my security stack. Now, some of them, if it's a brand new MSP and they say, I'm not ready to be a full, security vendor yet or anything like that, start with simple things like training, right? I mean, it's going to make that client more loyal to you. It's also going to create a lot less tickets when they know the basics, right? So you could even, if you just want to dip your toe in the water, start with something like training.
Yeah, and Michael and Chris, we were discussing this yesterday. Not every MSP needs to be an MSSP, right? So when you look at, as you mentioned, when you look at your customer base and understand their requirements, you adopt the baselines, some of which you've already adopted probably at this point in time. And then you figure out if these one-offs or these extensions into more advanced security capabilities are something you want to do in-house or partner with another service provider to be able to offer to your customers. But like at the very least, going back to the initial topic, identity is now at the center of your world, right? So protecting these identities and building the protections around what comes around them, which is through multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, having a unified view of identity, ensuring that you support multiple authentication protocols to give users access to different types of tools, getting a data layer so you understand what's happening across your customer base at the user level, but also at the device level. That's now key, right? And the endpoint is still extremely important today. So anything that you can do to manage endpoints, patch endpoints, protect endpoints is extremely important. Like out of the hundreds of MSPs that I speak with every month, I would say every single one of them is adopting some form of these 2 points. And then you have the things that you add on top, the SIEM, the managed SOC, the way you want to do backup, the network level layer security, depending on the setup of specific customers, your incidents response and forensics layer. But this doesn't need to be overwhelming, right? As Mike said, you can start small, figure out what most of your customers need today, and then build on top of that over time. And as long as you're trying to improve like 1% every day, if you look at your stack 5 months from now, then it's going to be way more sophisticated, way more tailored to your customers than it is today. And it's going to tick the boxes that you want to tick.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing to partner with an MSSP. If you're an MSP, like, that was the shiny object a few years ago. Everybody's going to be an MSSP. Like everybody was rushing towards this goal, right? And some people were very successful, some weren't. But I know a lot of really large MSPs that stay out of that really deep dive security space and will partner with an MSSP who's not there to steal your client, develop a strong relationship. And that might be a more scalable way for you to grow, right? Instead of making all these investments and hiring people that are brand new to handle those one-off clients that might need some more hand-holding. That's something that I'm seeing more of. I didn't see that a few years ago. I think the smarter MSPs are realizing that there's certain things you don't have to be the jack of all trades. Focus on what your stack is and what you're really good at. And if your client has needs that are beyond that scope of work, well, you have a trusted partner you can go work with. And I think there's a lot of good relationships being built out there on that.
And also, like, to add to what you're saying is, like, if you're not calling yourself an MSSP and going deep into these waters, that doesn't mean that you're depositioning yourself as a security-focused MSP. You can still be a security-focused MSP that offers the baseline, even the advanced feature that most of your customers and the customers that you're going to attract over the next 5 years want. And then you complement that through partnerships.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've always had the challenge in the industry of what is an MSP and then what is an MSSP and what's a security-focused MSP. It's kind of, there's no fixed guideline to that.
No, it's a debate that's happening at bars all over the world right now, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a follow-up question to that, actually, because I think we mentioned sort of MSPs and whether they are tackling vertical or horizontal markets. Are you seeing more MSPs focus on a particular vertical market now, or is there no sort of change in that direction?
I don't have any numbers behind it, but in my conversations, it does seem to me that a lot of MSPs are focusing on a vertical or a couple of verticals. Because most of the time when we're having these conversations, they might not be completely vertical specific, but they know their lane of, I do really well in manufacturing. I do really well with small medical offices. And it's not to say that they won't take on a client from outside of that, but once they understand that, start speaking the language, there are a lot of advantages to that. So once you beyond just your knowledge of that industry, but also, referrals and things like that, if you become known as the MSP in your area that's really good with law firms, those law firms all talk to one another. So I think there's a lot of advantages. I think, again, that's the age-old debate. Some people think you're crazy if you're vertical specific. Some people think you're crazy if you're agnostic. I'm just going off of my conversations, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think people really found their lane and are focusing on, I know this is what I do well. Our sales and marketing tools are focused on these markets. I know I can service them. I know I'm profitable because I know my real margin. I think that that's where the trend is going. Again, not that that's in a study, but that's just based on my conversation.
And if you think about growth in general, that's the perfect way to get product market fit for a lot of MSPs out there, right? You understand the vertical really well. You know the tools that it require. You negotiate the deals with the vendors that you need. You train your teams accordingly. You position yourself in the market in a very specific set of ways. And then you build a playbook across all of these to become successful across a specific vertical. 100%. I'm seeing the same as you. Obviously, it's anecdotal at this point, but most MSPs that I speak with today have a consolidation of customers that are in one or two specific verticals, and they keep themselves balanced by having customers that are not in this vertical, either because they've had them prior to finding their focus, or because they're starting to see the value in diversifying over time. And once you become an expert at a vertical, have the brand name, are able to acquire people, then you can move on to the next one and then to the next one. At some point, you become large enough where you have different playbooks where you're extremely good at things. But it's a simple way, it's a good way to simplify a very difficult problem in general.
Totally agree. And on a slightly more flippant kind of casual comment, I was recording a partner interview only last week, and the partner said, if you want to be successful in the vertical, hire a lawyer or a legal law firm, because the chances are they're going to split up into 5 different law firms and staff are going to go from one to the other, and then your one client turns into 10. So, that's a great way to sort of keep business, is just get a law firm on the books.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next question, and it wouldn't be an expert panel in 2023 if I didn't ask this. So I'm sure you've been asked it many, many times. But we're going to discuss AI and predict quite predictably. So what are the concerns that maybe around AI that MSPs should be looking for, and what are the opportunities around AI that MSPs should be looking to exploit? We'll kick off with Antoine.
Yeah, so I mean that's a top of mind topic for a lot of people today. So the breakthroughs that we've seen recently with the latest large language models are remarkable, right? There's no doubt at this point that they're already having a profound effect on how we work, and that this is not a phase. It's not the hype of the quarter. It's here to stay. With that said, it's important that we stay in general really close to the space so that you're not left behind. You can do so by watching YouTube videos, subscribing to newsletters, being on social media, etc. It's also important to start incorporating AI today in low-hanging fruit areas. So like don't try to revamp your business with these new creations, but there are areas that are very high effort and low reward and high volume. For example, AI can help with go-to-market efforts, right? Craft outbound sequences, A/B test different things, try different messaging, can help on a technical basis by writing scripts or getting you 90% of the way of writing a specific script, can help you do light analyses on different trends that you're seeing within your customer base. These are all things that you can start incorporating now that will yield very good results and efficiencies without having you over-rotate in one direction. It's also important to stay on the lookout for what vendors in the space are doing with the AI, and more importantly, to differentiate clickbait features from core features that really add value. Because now you're starting to see every vendor add AI to their tools, but does it really add value to you? Is it worth the effort to move off whatever you have now to that specific vendor? Does the cost really matter? Is your team going to use these features on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? These are all questions that you have to ask yourself, because you're going to get a lot of now hype products. A lot of companies are going to get created and are going to fail in a couple of years. So you really want to pick the ones that are building long-term value for you through these new technologies. It's also important to keep in mind that what you share with most of these large language models is not always private. So I would come up with guidelines for your business on what type of info you can share safely, and inform your teams on that, so they don't send sensitive information to different types of vendors that would put you in situations that you don't want to be in. And in addition to what I just mentioned, it's important to keep in mind when you look at a new breakthrough that can touch on a lot of different things, it's important to look at what the market is doing. Your competitors are and will continue to use AI to improve their processes. I would ask, how is this affecting me in the short, medium, and long term? Also, attackers are starting to use AI and are going to continue to do so. I would ask the same question. So how is it going to affect me today, tomorrow, and in the very distant future? So you need to think about these things so you understand the different risks and can position yourself the right way. Positioning yourself the right way doesn't necessarily mean you have to adopt AI as well to counter these threats. It sometimes does mean that if it's through a service or a protection layer that's efficiently using these systems, but it's mostly about understanding the risks and building the systems around your business to not only make it resistant to these types of threats in the short to medium term, but also position you in the long term to adopt these tools when they reach the level of maturity that you desire to be able to grow your business to the next phase. So when I talk to a lot of, this is a topic that scares a lot of people, obviously, because with every new paradigm shift, there's kind of a new level of fear that we're going to get replaced, that threats are going to be so big that we're not going to be able to counter them. And a lot of people are comparing that to how they fared with the cloud computing era, like the move to the cloud, and how they were able to make it okay, even though they were not one of the first people to stay in the loop, etc. I would say there's a lot of similarities between AI and the move to the cloud that we went through over the last 15 years. But the main difference that I think we have to be careful about is that this is moving much faster and is starting off at a higher level of maturity of where the cloud computing industry was when it started. So just if you're aware of your surroundings, if you're aware of where the space is going, if you're starting to use AI in small areas without over-rotating too much to find efficiencies, then what you'd be doing is setting yourself up for success in the medium to long term.
Yeah, I could tell you, if you're an MSP and you're looking to do a lunch and learn or a webinar to your end users, if you put AI in that title, people will show up. I was in Chicago last week, and it was a panel discussion, and there was 100-person max in that restaurant, and they maxed it out 100 people. And it was just a panel discussion where we came up, and it was me, another vendor, and the partner, just answering questions. And I think, you know, the small business community just wants, again, to understand. All they get is the clickbait stuff. Nobody's going to click on something about some boring feature of AI, even though that is probably the one that most affects your business. You want to, you know, look at the ones about robots taking over the world and all that stuff, right? But I think when we're in that discussion, I think it applies to the small business community and to the MSP community, is that, there's this fear, and it goes back to that second question you asked, Chris, about, hiring and what are we doing with this? Is AI going to come in and replace some of these jobs? And I would say, I don't think AI is replacing jobs, but AI is definitely replacing tasks. There are tasks that can be done a lot more efficiently. The partner that I was with gave a really good example. He had gotten an agreement from one of his vendors, and he said it wasn't a huge amount. It was a 10,000 annual agreement. It was 23 pages long. So he says, and before I send this off to my lawyers, I'm going to plug this into ChatGPT and say, give me 8 bullet points on this and any things that are actionable items. 12 minutes later, he got that synopsis back. Now, that's not going to put a law firm at a business, but it's going to really, really make that much more efficient. I equate it to spell check. Spell check didn't put the English teachers out of business. We still take English as little kids, right? But it makes you faster, right? So I think the AI really does tie into that second question that we talked about in terms of how can I allow my employees to do what they're really, really good at, instead of spending 80% of their time doing this monotonous work that maybe AI can help us with, right? So it goes back to that efficiency piece. And I think your point too, Antoine, about all the vendors that will pop into the space and come and go in the next 2 years, you will see a lot of them. And there will be something that you'll be watching somebody on stage with something that looks awesome, right? It's so cool. I can't believe it could do this. But you really do have to digest it and say, but really, is this something that I really need? And is this something that's really going to help my business grow and help me, service my clients? Or is this a shiny new tool that it looks cool, but really isn't going to help me get to where I need to go? I think that is really what we need to be focused on, both as vendors and as MSPs, and then ultimately in the small business space, is really just understanding and getting our hands wrapped around, what it actually is, and in what ways it can make us more efficient, more secure, right? We know the criminals are using AI for their nefarious reasons. Well, there's a lot of great AI features built in within all of our vendor stacks that are doing the same things on the good side. So this really comes down to just education, understanding, and really figuring out what AI is going to do for you as a business and to help drive you forward.
Yeah, and I think just to follow up from that is the question was posed earlier around AI for MSPs, but as you mentioned, Mike, I guess SMEs are asking the same question. So, if MSPs are being asked this question, what kind of advice, or is it the same advice that MSPs should be offering to end users about AI? It's not going to rise of the robots kind of thing, but are they pitching solutions, or are they kind of trying to explain what the future of AI may be in the SME space?
I think mostly it's just education in terms of, look, you're already working with AI. I don't care what industry you're in. It's happening. It's already part of your life. So just kind of breaking that barrier down, like, oh, what happens when AI gets here? Well, AI's been here for a long time, right? We're seeing the really cool stuff in the news now. But I think the successful MSPs aren't going into this with an objective of, I'm going to now sell you this, or here's a product that uses it. It's more just based on, I'm educating you. It's part of my security stack that I'm using right now. You work with me as an MSP. It's a real integral part of what we're doing, but not really looking at, here's this one really cool thing that utilizes AI, because then it becomes kind of sales pitchy. I think if you can get the small business to understand the need for AI at this point, if you want to be a competitive business in any industry, it's something that is really going to be part of your business, and just understanding that piece of it, then just talk about your full stack and just, this is what it is. If you have questions, you could always come to me as your trusted advisor, Mr. Business Owner. But here's what you need to know, and here's what we're doing on our end.
Yeah, does that make sense? You agree with that, Antoine?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And like, as long as people understand the fundamentals, this is something that's here to stay, right? It's not something that anyone can try to capitalize on really quickly and then just step up their business overnight, right? The wise way of doing this is to build strong foundations within your company and your customers' companies on the understanding of how this works, how this is going to get both of us, in this case, to be more efficient over time, and then start layering these new advancements within your stack by ensuring that you're picking the right vendors that are using these new capabilities in a way that makes sense for you medium to long term and are not just flashy in the short term. And because trust at the end of the day is the most important thing that you have with your customers, right? And taking them on emotional roller coasters with features that make them feel like it's going to revolutionize a part of their business or the type of service that you offer them is going to set them up for disappointment at some point. The way to do it is just to take it slow, make sure that everyone's on the same page, and as soon as you see something that's worth mentioning to them as creating true long-term value, you make sure to communicate it.
Yeah, I think that communication is critical because even, your client base, your existing client base, just for retention, if you're continuously educating them on AI and all the different things, the threats that are out there, you're going to be their trusted advisor. If you're not, even though you might be utilizing all those things and servicing your clients perfectly, there will be a competitor who will swoop in with that shiny story and say, oh, do you know about this? And you might be doing all the things and even more than that MSP is doing, but you haven't communicated it. You're now at risk of losing that client. And that's something we see day in and day out. It's one of the things that I always harp on at MSP space is not being able to communicate all the great things that you're doing. AI is one of those things. Make sure that they understand that you're the person that they can come to with AI questions, because you don't want them to randomly sit on another webinar from a competitor down the street who seems like they're the smartest AI person in the world, and now they're going to give them a call and say, how come my MSP's never told me that? So it's about retention too.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic tip, which leads me on to the final question that I've got. So if anyone's got additional questions, please pop them into the questions panel and I'll put them to Mike and Antoine. But my final question, and you've already given us lots of good tips, but I'm looking for another one, because I know you both spend a lot of time speaking to MSPs day and well into the evening, I guess in most cases, around the bar or to different events and things. So what are you hearing on the ground in terms of any specific challenges they're seeing, or any specific sort of tips that you think MSPs maybe should be looking to utilize going forward? Let's start with Antoine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. What I can tell you is that this is advice that I would give someone who's starting an MSP now, or who asks me for advice about how to take their business to the next level, and I feel very strongly about it. Today, I'm seeing two buckets of MSPs. The partners that are growing their revenue quickly and their customer base, so there's a great kind of momentum behind them, and the business going in a direction where they want it to go. And then partners that are stagnating and growing linearly and starting to burn out, and that's always been the case, but that bucket still firmly exists. What I can tell you is that almost 100% of the MSPs that are in the first bucket, the successful bucket, not just from a monetary perspective, but also from a well-being perspective, are partners that are in a growth mindset and are actively setting revenue goals for the next 6 months. So this is a very important thing for them. They haven't kind of accepted the fact that they've turned into a lifestyle business, and that's what we're doing, and our job is to retain customers. We're not going to aggressively try to attract new customers. They see go-to-market as a key factor to their success. So they have a clear strategy that they revise constantly. They're investing in their go-to-market efforts. Decision makers are using their technical know-how to improve their go-to-market efforts. They dedicate 20% plus of their time on a weekly basis to their go-to-market efforts. So that's the second one. The third one is they're unifying their stacks. Successful partners are unifying their stacks with platforms that allow them to reduce their operating costs, their vendor costs, and that's improving security and just the well-being of their team that are managing these tools on a day-to-day basis. And the fourth point is they're using or actively thinking of adopting the new breakthroughs to improve different aspects of the business. I'm talking about large language models here, starting with small tasks that usually take time, that can mostly be automated using AI, such as email sequencing, sequence writing, script writing, market positioning, competitive analysis, these types of things. So what I can tell you is that almost 100% of the successful partners that I'm seeing are doing most of the things on this list. And doing these things usually sets you up for success, not because of the specific actions, but because it shows that you're positioning your business in a way that enables it to grow over time. And when I talk to partners that are in the second bucket, that are struggling, that are burning out, that are not feeling great about where they are as a business today, can usually mean a lot of different things, right? But it all boils down to the mentality that you have towards growth, and whether this is something that whether you're willing to just take off your technical hat sometimes, because that seems to be the case in a lot of situations, and just start to adopt a growth mindset of saying, this is a business, these are the fundamentals of the business. We are here today, acknowledge the things that are not going great, acknowledge the opportunities, and then set up a path to success. Just that action and dedicating this time will almost guarantee that you'll end up doing the things that I've listed in the previous path. And if you look at your business a couple of years down the road from that moment in time where you made this decision, then I can guarantee you that you'll be much better, in a much better position than the one that you are in today.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think the number one thing to do is just define your business, define your MSP. To your point, are you in a growth mode? Is that your mentality, or are you a lifestyle, MSP? And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. I think a lot of people say that they want to be in this growth mode, but they're not ready to actually do it. So just be honest with yourself. Take a look at yourself and say, where do I want to be in 5 years? Don't just throw out, I want to grow 50%. If you don't have any sort of plan and how are you going to hire and where are you going to go out, then that's not a plan, right? Sit down and have that conversation. That's why I'm always a big proponent of peer groups. I know we talked about it yesterday, but I don't know very many people that have gotten into a peer group, an accountability group, and not found a lot of value out of that. And it'll really just highlight exactly what you're doing right now. So when I mean, a lot of time when they talk about like defining your MSP, you're just focused on your stack, and that's a very critical part of this, right? Is standardizing, not doing one specific stack for this client and something else for that. You're never going to grow that way. It's defining, but also defining your lane as to where you want to be. Do you want to be in growth mode? If you're a lifestyle, are you looking for an exit strategy? That's fine too, but there's still work to be done there. How am I going to make myself the most valuable I can be for when I do want to sell my business, right? So having those discussions, I think we're in a good spot in the channel, because the conversations we were having 6-7 years ago, we're trying to convince a small business why outsourcing IT was the right thing, just the idea of a managed service provider. Now, and I think again, the pandemic helped this, it really accelerated it. Now the conversation is not why you should outsource your IT, but why should you outsource it to me? And that then becomes where your stack comes into play, and how are you differentiating yourself from your competitors in your region or in that market? That's very critical. So understanding that is really how you're going to grow. So, I think that comes down to your point you made. I think it was spot on. At some point, if you're going to grow and you're going to be in growth mode and you're an owner of an MSP, you've got to stop being a tech and start being a business owner. And that's where you look at your operations, really understanding where your margin's coming from and which clients are profitable, which ones are, and why, and how am I going to get to these places. A lot of those folks that I talk to as MSPs kind of get stuck at a really good mark, maybe $600,000-$700,000, and they don't get to that because they're not willing to just let go and let their team handle the day-to-day stuff, while you become a business owner and start treating this as, how am I going to get from 1 million to 3 million, 3 million to 5 million, 5 to 10, and planning out, a 3, 4, 5 year plan for that. Those are what the successful MSPs, almost across the board, they will always tell you the pinnacle moment for them was when they let go and let people do the day-to-day stuff and they became a business owner.
And it doesn't need to be stressful, right? Like you get burnt out and stressed when your processes don't allow you to scale. When you're wearing many hats, you want to get into every single detail. You're just running the business the way you were running it 5 years ago. Being in a growth mindset can be not stressful because it's going to protect your revenue, because you have an engine that's bringing new business that protects from business leaving, protects you from changes in the economy, because some industries or some companies will grow during a hard time, others will contract in the good times, and that kind of hedges your bets in general. And it's the foundation of building a strong business in general. Like if it were an MSP business, or if you were a vendor or any type of other business, that's the mindset that should be in, right? And not all people are burnt out, not all people are stressed, but all people across all industries that own a business where they wear many hats and still do the things that they used to do on a day-to-day basis that they used to do 5 years ago are burnt out and are stressed and are not happy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It seems scary to be in ultra growth mode and it could add stress and all of that. But if you are in a lifestyle position right now, I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, both of you, partners who basically have all their eggs in a couple of baskets, have a couple really big clients. And I unfortunately know one MSP who lost 2 of those big clients during the pandemic, and they had to close their doors because they were so, dependent on those couple of clients that they had, where if they were in a constant growth mode, they could have absorbed that, right? Because they were, you know, replacing that revenue with other revenue. But it was too late at that point because they didn't have a go-to-market strategy. So when they realized they were losing this client, you know, it was too late. They weren't in that mode. So it was actually, because it, you know, seemingly less stressful, knowing what you have and I've got my client base, turned into the most stressful thing they could have had. And had they gone back and looked at it again, they would have put the efforts in 2-3 years ago to make sure that they weren't in such a precarious position.
And as you mentioned, like peer groups are a fantastic support system and a way to just position yourself for success. But you could also talk to your vendors. Like you would be surprised how much of my week I spend just talking to our different partners through different types of things that have nothing to do with JumpCloud. Just like use the partnerships that you have to their maximum, and don't assume that like a vendor that's offering you a specific service is only gonna be able to support you in that specific things. Like as a matter of fact, like could you put up my email in the chat? And like, I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you want to talk through anything, like please I'd love to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll get both emails into the chat, and there'll be a follow-up email which comes out, which has got all the details as well. So no one's asking me for my tip, but I'm going to give it anyway, which is peer groups. I 100% agree. I think that everything that Antoine described as being kind of the problem with the growth, the mindset, can be addressed by joining a peer group, because people are going to listen to your business and understand where you are, and then they're going to hold you accountable to actually doing it. So I'd say, I mean, I never regretted joining a peer group in my MSP, and I've never heard of any MSP that's joined a peer group that subsequently said it wasn't good for them. So it's a great way to sort of speak to other people. So that would be my tip. But anyway, we've got a question in from a viewer, which I'm glad you're answering this rather than me, because I probably wouldn't know where to start with it. So good luck. With the economy the way it is, I'm having to lower my standard prices to win business. Does Michael or Antoine have any tips on what I can do so I don't have to keep lowering margin? And I'll let you fight over who's going to go first.
I could give it a go. Yeah, I mean, we see this as well as vendors in general. Like in general, people are more price sensitive than they were, and that's a cycle that we go through every 10 years or so. And it's a normal part of the world. Like it's part of how the macroeconomy works in general. You need to keep growing, right? And if we go back to like the core that we were talking about, when you're in a growth mindset, you always have an engine that's attracting new business. So that gives you the biggest amount of flexibility to price, to discount, to upsell, to cross-sell. And that's all of these things tend to work together to maintain a steady stream of growth. You're exposed though when you have to consistently sell at a lower price and your margins are not protected anymore, which seems to be the case now because of the economy. What I would say is, first of all, you go back to first principles. You're selling them value. Right? Is the value that you're selling lower than the price that they're expecting? You can always go back to the value and talk about it and try to make a point through this type of setup. There's also making deals based on like ramps and based on different factors that are not standard. Instead of having a flat fee, maybe put in different types of cost, incentive, ramps on cost over time that would help the customer come on board at a lower price originally and have these prices ramped up over time when they consolidate their outsourcing of IT to you, and when they have a strong belief that you are a good business, that you're a good business to grow. Once you have that relationship that you've developed during this time, then you're in a much better situation to have a straight up conversation with these customers. So you're going to have to, obviously, the way that you're mentioning now, lower your costs sometimes to get into a deal. But there's a way to protect your margins by just talking about values and structuring deals in a way that allow people to come in at a certain price and see an uplift of this price over time as the economy gets better, as the services, as they start seeing the materialization of the services that you're offering them and the savings that you're generating for them across time. So it's not easy, right? But these are like the tools that we as vendors in general use when having conversations with direct customers or with our partners.
Yeah, I think the conversation really needs, again, it goes back to defining yourself as an MSP and what it is that you do differently than your competitors. Because if a small business is just looking at apples to apples, they're looking at you as a commodity, and clearly you're not a commodity, right? You're a service company that's going to have a lot of different things than what your competitors are doing. So being able to have it up front and document and say, here's all the things I'm doing on my security side, here's how I vet all my vendors, and have that as a real document to be able to slide across the table and say, I know you're bidding it out and looking at some other vendors and competitors of mine. Make sure that they're doing all of these things that I'm doing. And all of a sudden you'll start to see that, yeah, you're not talking about apples to apples. What you're offering them is a far superior product. I also like the idea of putting them on a path and saying, well, look, here's where you need to be. I know maybe this is too expensive right now, but we could start here and let's plan, every 6 months of readdressing, and we'll start, looking at some things that we could do to get you to this ultimate goal of being as secure and efficient as you need to be. I think businesses all understand that. Like, I'm being a consultant. It's a prescriptive style sales process. This is what you need to do. I also get it, like you can't afford it right now, but let's get you there. Let's start here, get you there. I think people really start to understand that. You're not just selling them a product, you're selling them the solution. And if you can't afford it right now, we'll get you on a path to get there. I've seen a lot of presentations from partners to their business groups that talk to exactly that, and it's been very successful.
Great. Well, that's it. That's an hour, believe it or not. That's flown by really quickly. So before we sign off, maybe if you could just let people know how they can get in touch with you, Mike, and then we'll do the same with Antoine, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, absolutely. mdepalma@datto.com is my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with everybody. So yeah, reach out anytime, even if it's just with just a chat.
Same here. My email is antoine@jumpcloud.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'd love to have a conversation with you, just exchange ideas, understand your concerns, opportunities that you're seeing, and I'll share my what I'm seeing on the ground as well, of course.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for both of you for taking the time, and thanks for everyone for watching today. It will be sent out, the recording, so you can watch it again or share with your team, but we do appreciate your time, and thanks for listening, and goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.